All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're walking into our Watch What Happens live mock interview session with our admissions officers. I'm going to give everybody about another minute to come from the previous session, and then we'll get started because we have lots of great information to share with you. I do see we're already at 440 viewers. This is fantastic. We're really glad that you're here with us today, as our two panelists have some amazing information to share with you. So I think I will let it get up to 600, which should be very soon, and then we'll get started. Yeah, climbing quickly. So definitely want to make sure we use all the time we have. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Jose Araya. I'm the Learner Engagement Manager at the AAMC, and I'm really excited to host yet another session of our Watch What Happens live mock interview session. We have two great panelists joining us today. Ms. Jennifer Kimball, who's the Director of Admissions at Vanderbilt School of Medicine, and Dr. Lena Mehta, Associate Dean for Admissions at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. So thank you both for being here. Before we get started, I'm just going to make one quick announcement. All attendees are coming into the presentation. You are all muted, so you don't need to worry about that. If you have any questions for our panelists, please make sure to use the Q&A and send your questions through there. And once this is done, in 24 hours, the recording will be available for 30 days in the VFairs platform. So I think we're ready to get started. Again, thank you both for being here. And we'll start with Ms. Jennifer Kimball.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're going to talk to you today a little bit about interviewing for medical school. Every medical school out there has kind of a different nuance to how they interview their candidates. So there are basically two different types of interview structures. One is going to be the MMI, the multiple mini interview, where you kind of rotate through different sections, sort of quote unquote acting out a prompt that is given. And they assess different character traits, different attributes that they're looking for their medical school. And then we have more of the traditional interview. And that's really what we're going to focus on a little bit more today, is the structure of a traditional interview day. If you are curious as to how your medical school interviews that you'll be interviewing at, oftentimes the medical school will inform you of their structure ahead of time. Also, just to put a plug in for the AAMC's resource, the MSAR Medical School Admissions Requirement Book also breaks down how their interview day is structured. So here at Vanderbilt, we basically do two interviews on your interview day. One is a closed file interview where we read from a list of prepared prompts. The second interview is an open file summary interview where our faculty member just learns a little bit more about you and the application materials. So Dr. Mehta, do you want to talk to us a little bit about how Case Western handles it?
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Kimball. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is a very exciting time in your lives as you get ready to potentially go down that path of medicine. So as most schools are going to still be doing virtual interviews this year, as most of you are aware, that little thing called the pandemic had us all pivot to virtual interviews, and we found that it works really well for schools and for applicants. A few schools have gone back to live interviews, and while most of the conversation that we have will be in reference to virtual interviews, if we have time, we'll touch on some live interview tips as well. Case Western Reserve, like most of the other schools, is going to be virtual again this year and probably in perpetuity, unless there's a reason to stop being virtual. We have two straight MD programs, a Case Western and an MD PhD program. For our two MD programs, we have semi-structured or structured interviews, where our interviewers follow a standardized list of questions in order to standardize the experience for the applicant. And then each applicant also gets a medical student interviewer as well. Both interviewers are blinded to all metrics, and the medical student interviewer is only able to see the essays. So you will find, as Ms. Kimball said, that schools vary in how they interview their candidates. Again, it could be MMI, it could be traditional interview, it could be a panel interview, it could be one-on-one, it could be standardized, not standardized. And I echo her plug for the MSR, where schools, where the guide where it's a guide that does tell you information about how schools interview. So with that, we are going to move into a mock interview, and I will be interviewing medical school applicant Jen Kimball. Hello, Jen. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. It's lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
So why don't you just start out and tell us, I'm going to be taking notes as we speak, by the way. So why don't you tell us what led you to apply to our medical school?
Yeah, thank you, Linda. That's a good question. I'm really glad you asked me that question. I'm deeply drawn to your medical school because of its unwavering commitment to excellence in medical education, research, and community service. From my extensive research and interactions with current students and faculty, I've come to admire your school's curriculum, which emphasizes collaboration and clinical experience. One aspect that really resonates with me is producing competent physicians and compassionate leaders who are committed to serving their communities. You emphasize community engagement and aligns perfectly with my own values and why I really want to be a doctor. I'm eager to contribute to your culture of giving back and making a meaningful difference in the lives of patients and communities.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned medicine and your interest in pursuing this path. Can you tell me why medicine? What interested you in medicine? And building on that, more specifically, why do you want to be a physician as opposed to other healthcare-oriented professions?
I think, make sure. Can you see me okay? Okay, good. I
Bit of a
think,
glare on your face.
oh, okay, is that better? Okay, so I think for me, the reason why I really want to be a doctor is that I really want to be the person responsible for the person's healthcare. I like to be a leader and take charge of the situation and delegate responsibility to other people. I really work very well independently when I'm given tasks to do. When I was in the 7th grade, I did a presentation on being a doctor, and everyone has just told me that I should continue trying to be a doctor. And so I'm applying to be a doctor. I really enjoy sciences and enjoy helping people. So I really think I should be a doctor, and that's why I'm going to apply to med school right now.
Okay. Jen, can you tell me about a time when you experienced a stressful situation and how you handled it?
I think a really stressful situation I had was when I was taking the MCAT. It was really a stressful time. I was taking physics 2, and I ended up having to take the calculus-based physics instead of the algebra-based physics, and it was really hard. The professor was really tough, and doing that on top of my MCAT prep was just really a stressful time for me with the MCAT and then this calculus-based physics class I was taking. But I did okay. I mean, you saw my transcripts. I mean, I did fine with that class. So I think I'm ready for medical school now.
Okay. Well, Jen, thank you very much for those responses to my questions. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda.
All right, thank you both. That was fantastic. There were definitely comments from the audience about your acting, literally saying not a question, just wanted to say their acting is amazing. So thank you both. Thank you to the audience for submitting questions. What we're gonna do first, before we get into the Q&A section, is both Ms. Kimball and Dr. Mehta are gonna offer feedback on what you just saw and what could have gone better, and give you some pointers on that. So please take it away.
So what you all just witnessed was an amalgamation and a compilation of all of the worst things we've seen in an interview, all bundled into one horrendoma. So it is highly unlikely that we would see all of these foibles in one interview. At least we hope it's unlikely. I doubt anyone could do as good of a job as Ms. Kimball just did. So lots of things for us to dissect. The first one is immediately Jen called me Linda, which A, is not my name. I am Dr. Maida, and that's how I would introduce myself. So be mindful of the title of the person to whom you're speaking. And if you need clarification, please ask.
Absolutely. And thanks for picking up on that comment, because we do get a lot of candidates that we're glad you feel very comfortable interviewing with us, but that is just a little bit too familiar to call your interviewer by the first name, unless they said, please call me, Sam. And then you go, okay, I will call you Sam. And if you accidentally call them Dr. Smith, they go, no, call me Sam. So with that. The other thing I want to point out is there's a tool, I'm sure nobody's heard of it yet, but it's called AI, ChatGPT. And what I did for the first scenario is I typed in, why do I want to go to, I put in Vanderbilt medical school, and it gave me a response. And so I basically read verbatim on that. And I was focused directly at that screen. It is not the easiest thing in the world to express your thoughts and your communications via a little tiny camera on your laptop or computer. And we get that, but really try to maintain eye contact with your camera during the interview.
And to build on that, sorry, Jen, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Our assumption is that you will come in with your authentic self. You won't need to be reading canned responses that you've written already. And so one of our tips is going to be, get used to talking about yourself. Practice being interviewed. Don't memorize answers. You're always going to get a few. Why do you want to be a doctor? You're going to get potentially some that are repeated over and over. But I always say practice, have people interview you and ask you questions that have nothing to do with medicine, that you just get more facile with thinking off the cuff, thinking on your feet, talking about yourself. So the expectation is that you will not be reading answers off your screen, that you're going to come to us with your authentic self, having really reflected on why you want to go into medicine.
At some universities in their career center, they have software on like practice interview where it has like a computer person that will just ask you questions. And that will also help you think about how to think on the fly to answer those questions in the best of your ability.
The other thing you may have noticed was the unmade bed in the background. An extreme example, but one nonetheless. We have trained our interviewers to not look at backgrounds because we know that we're going to see varying backgrounds. You may have to interview from a spot that isn't ideal. You may get to interview from a spot that is ideal. Some schools, ours included, provide virtual backgrounds that you can use when you interview with us if you so choose. So while our interviewers are trained to not take backgrounds into consideration, if we see an unmade bed, we're only human beings. If you see sloppiness, slovenly, inappropriate things in the background, we interviewed somebody last year with like Budweiser posters plastered on the back of the backdrop. It was hard to believe, but they did it. So be mindful of what your background is. Just keep it professional. But again, we're not judging you on the luxury of it. We're judging you on, not even judging you, but we're going to be tuned in. Is there something inappropriate happening in the back?
Exactly. And we recognize a lot of our candidates live in residence hall rooms where it's basically, a loft bed situation and a desk. And like Dr. Maida said, we totally get that. We're totally fine with that. It's just think about what unsaid message you're putting out there with Budweiser posters in the backdrop. So,
and that
it's
can
not
be
a brand thing.
It's not a brand thing. I am a Corona. Never mind. Okay. So keep that in mind. And as we discussed, practice being interviewed virtually, and have your lighting adjusted. Don't have your ring light right at your chin like Ms. Kimball just did, where it was almost looked like a horror movie, but not quite. So play with your lighting, play with how your clothing looks, play with your background. Think about how you're presenting yourself on Zoom. Are you maintaining eye contact with the camera? As human beings, our impulse is to look at the eyes of the person on the screen, but that means you may be looking down. So, practice shifting your eyes from your camera down to the eyes of the person to whom you're speaking. just get used to that. I'm sure you're all used to it by now. We've been doing this long enough, but just be mindful of how you're showing up to other people.
And I was trying to figure out a way, I couldn't do it where I'm doing this mock interview from, where I had a lot of backlighting, and that throws off a lot of the cameras. So forward lighting is much better.
And you don't have to invest in a Zoom ring at home.
Nope.
My office from where I work, sometimes I have 2 lamps in front. So the front lighting is key to proper illumination. In fact, I probably have a little too much backlighting behind me right now. Some of the responses from Ms. Kimball were less than ideal. When asked about why physician as opposed to other healthcare professions, she didn't really answer the second part. And the first part, of course, is based on youthful observations about writing a project in 7th grade that was so good that everyone said, she should keep doing it. We obviously expect you to have more mature exploration of medicine, more current medicine, current medical experiences that help you understand it's for you. Some of her responses, the physician's not always the leader of the team. As you start to delve further into medicine, you'll realize that in the interprofessional world of team sports that medicine now is, it may not be the physician who has all the answers. It may be the respiratory therapist that everybody's looking towards. It may be the nutritionist. It may be the nurse who is on call overnight with the patient. So being a physician doesn't necessarily mean that you're leading. Being a physician does mean that you have you have ultimate responsibility, but we really do want to hear a more thought out answer about why medicine and why not other professions in the practice without judging and without artificially assigning yourself a status that isn't necessarily deserved.
I also repeated myself several times in kind of the answer. So really focus on being a little bit more succinct with your responses. The more you say it, doesn't manifest into existence. So,
and that's another reason to practice being interviewed, is because you start to understand how organized thinking will show up in the context of an interview. The other question of tell me about a stressful time and how you handled it. Ms. Kimball, of course, the MCAT's stressful. We know this. Taking the MCAT while you're in class is very stressful. But guess what? All 50,000 other applicants to medical school also were in school while they were studying for the MCAT, maybe some were on a gap year, but you got my drift. So we know it's stressful, but what we're getting at with that question is something that was personally something of yours that's not common to all pre-meds. Some reflection. We're looking for grit. We're looking for tenacity. We're looking for problem solving. We're looking for a real situation. Maybe you've been lucky enough to never have anything terrible happen in your life, and that's okay. But some type of that's not okay. That's fabulous. For you. But some situation that was important to you where you're able to reflect about how you came out of it.
I think it's helpful to know, like, whenever they ask you, like, tell me about a time when you've, been in a stressful situation, when you had to manage multiple demands or whatever the case may be, there's kind of a mathematical formula for that, and that's the STAR method. Lay out the situation, then the task, then your action, and then kind of the result of what happened in the scenario. That kind of helps you stay on target with that kind of response without coming across defensive, which that might happen in your interview. They might say, oh, I see you made a C in organic chemistry. Tell me what was going on spring of your junior year when you took that class. And if you're like, I worked really hard. I think I did my best. That what they want to know is just the situation. Like, you made it through a screening to get there to interview. We don't interview everybody who applies. I don't think any medical school interview, but everybody who applies. But we might have some questions about something we see in your application. So try not to get defensive. We just need to know kind of the answer as to what was going on.
Yeah, exactly. As Ms. Kimball just said, you made it to the interview. So now it's a question of fit. It's getting to know you, maybe getting some questions answered that we may have about the application, and you getting to know us as well.
All right. Well, thank you.
Oh, and the other thing is watch out for your hand motion. I tried to fiddle with my face, my hands and stuff like that. That's very distracting. So if you speak with your hands like I do, you might just want to get like a little stress ball to kind of keep underneath the screen so you can kind of play with that or a fidget spinner or whatever, just to keep your hands occupied so they don't come into the screen and distract the interviewer from what your message is.
One other thing that I noticed with Ms. Kimball was the filler words, the verbal filler words of like, which is fine if a few sneak in. In fact, it can make your speech pattern seem more authentic. But this is where, again, practicing being interviewed, or even horrors, recording yourself and watching your interview responses can help you to understand, are you using these verbal filler words, which can be really distracting and can remove really from the content of what it is you're trying to transmit.
Mm-hmm. And going back also with the nonverbals, also the facial expressions are really important. We get a lot of what you're saying. If we ask you, tell me how you got interested in medicine, you're like, I've always been very interested in medicine. It's the best thing out there. With kind of a deadpan face, it doesn't feel very authentic. So make sure your facial expressions are appropriate for the topic that you're discussing.
And we get that you might be nervous, and we get that you may not be as authentic of yourself as you want to be at that moment. But again, practicing, understanding how you're being perceived by others. Those are actually words to live by, is how am I, do I have a blind spot? How am I being perceived? How do I think I'm actually showing up? Those are all really important things to pay attention to.
I love that. Thank you both so much. That was a lot of really valuable information. And we've definitely got lots of questions in the Q&A. I definitely want to ask one general question. Do applicants have the option of selecting, if they have the option of selecting virtual or in person, does that matter? How should they weigh that?
For us, we elected to do everything virtual to prevent any of that bias from being in person versus doing virtual. So unfortunately, I can't really answer that question.
There are a few schools who offer the option of either interviewing live or interviewing virtually. They say that they're two separate processes, and your outcome's not going to be impacted on whether you show up live or virtually. I don't know how that's actually sort of turned in the behind the scenes. I would hope and imagine that if they say that's the case, that would be the case. I think schools that have more of a regional pool, some of them have referred it back to live interviews, because you can just drive. You don't have to fly or potentially stay in a hotel. For those of us who have large national pools, we're definitely staying virtual. But for those schools who offer option of either, where you have to pick, it's kind of hard to guide you. It's really, do you have the resources to even go? Is it a hardship for you to go and you're going to opt for virtual? But as I said, those schools who are offering the dual options hopefully are keeping them separate and not letting bias come into play.
And I also want to say the interview day is also your opportunity to interview us. So if you've not had the opportunity to visit X, Y, and Z school in that town, it might be helpful for you to do an in-person interview.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you both for those responses. So we have questions about behaviors during the interview from applicants. Are applicants allowed to take notes during an interview? How do we feel about that? Okay.
I think so, as long as you're not a court stenographer and every time the interviewer asks a question, you write down the question, But
Yeah.
During our interview day, we also do information sessions, and we have our dean of the curriculum walk you through the curriculum. And so absolutely, it's appropriate to take notes.
It is. And to Ms. Kimball's point, please don't write down the interview questions and share them after the fact. We actually have our students sign that they're not, our interviewees sign that they're not going to share what transpired during the interview day in order to disseminate that information. Obviously, share curriculum, all that kind of stuff, but be professional, be ethical. Please don't do that. And a lot of times like I said to Ms. Kimball, I'm going to be taking notes as we speak, so that if I look away, that you understand that I'm not watching cat videos. Well, maybe I am, but you don't know. I'm joking. But I'm looking away to write. And similarly, you can say to your interviewer, do you mind if I write that down? But to Ms. Kimball's point, don't be writing the whole time, because this is a give and take conversation. So don't be writing the whole time.
Well, and again, you only have a set amount of time, so you want to maximize that amount of time with the interviewer. We
And
did have
you-
a question. Oh, please.
I was going to say, you might also have some prepared questions you would like to ask the interviewer. And so taking notes on their response is appropriate too.
And if you do have prepared questions, you can say at the end of the interview, do you have any questions for me? I do. Do you mind if I'm going to look down at my notes and ask those to you? So you can always tell us what you're doing so that we are understanding and we're coming along together.
Wonderful. Would you suggest if someone doesn't have a response to a question that they just say, I don't know? Would you prefer for them to take a moment and try to figure something out?
I think it depends on the question, actually. There are some questions that you should know the answer to. Why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to go to our school? You know, that kind of thing. If they ask you, medical billing questions or something like that, that you truly don't know the answer to, it's totally fine to say, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I haven't been exposed to medical billing, but I look forward to learning more about that in medical school. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of something that might not be on everybody's radar. So
Hopefully you won't be asked about medical billing, but hey, you never know.
you never know. Exactly. I was just trying to think of something because really for the interview, we're not trying to play gotcha, and we're not trying to, how would you handle this complex medical answer or question, because we have medical ethicists that don't even know how to answer some of those complex questions. So how can we expect that of you as an applicant to medical school who hasn't been exposed to this information, how to answer these hard questions in medicine?
I do know some schools do ask some of those ethical questions, but I think the
yeah.
emphasis is not on what the answer is. If the emphasis is on, are you thinking? Are you willing to learn? And so you can always ask for a moment. One of my peeves, I've interviewed people who every single question I ask, oh, that's a really great question. Oh, that's a really great question. Oh, that's a really great question, because they're trying to buy themselves time to respond. I would much rather have you say, can I just take a moment to think about this? Yay, I'm in on that. And if you don't know the answer to a question, if you are asked an ethical question, you know the answer, you can say, at this stage, I haven't been exposed to that, to Mrs. Kimball's point. I'm looking forward to learning more about this so I can get a more informed opinion.
Perfect. Thank you. There were a couple questions about what to wear during both in-person and virtual. Any tips and tricks on that one?
Conservative, probably. You just have to kind of get it to the middle. I'm thinking about, I was talking to a program director in emergency medicine a few years ago prior to the pandemic, and they told the candidates to just show up in business casual whenever they were comfortable, and everybody went bananas because nobody knew what that meant. It was really stressful.
Mm-hmm.
So they stopped. So conservative, a darker colored suit, not a ton of distracting things. If you're interviewing live, be careful with how much perfume or cologne you're wearing. Think about in a healthcare setting, we're not allowed to wear colognes or perfumes because patients may be sensitive. It's not necessarily the time to show off your most fashionista self. I would say that you just don't know who you're going to be interviewing with. So kind of shoot to the middle of conservative and professional.
If access to a suit is a challenge, the nice thing about virtual interviews is doesn't have to fit super well because we're really only seeing like the head and shoulders part of you. So if you have to borrow a roommate's suit jacket, we're not going to know that it doesn't fit around your middle and you can't button it. We just are kind of looking at head and shoulders.
And I would say we don't really judge based on the fashion. We've had a few students this year who interviewed in button downs and no tie and no jacket. And I don't know that anyone really mentioned it, but did stick out a little bit. So probably a jacket of some sort. Do be careful if you're business on the top and party on the bottom. If you're wearing shorts or sweatpants, there could always be that moment where you might have to stand up and the jig is up. So I firmly believe that you should dress for the part. If you have access to it, wear the full suit, wear nice shoes, do whatever you need to do to really feel the part.
Oh, based on the the reactions, you can see they love that response, definitely. and it has not happened to me, but I have been in a space where it did happen to someone I was talking to, and it's a little jarring. So thank you for being so detailed in those responses.
Let me interrupt you, Mary. So to your point about it being jarring, try and equalize all the parameters for yourself. Don't set yourself up to have any surprises that you did not anticipate. So try and just get everything equalized, get yourself in the right headspace on your interview day, dry run what you're going to be wearing, where you're going to be sitting, what your background looks like, what your microphone sounds like, what your lighting looks like. Just dry run everything so you can minimize any surprises. You don't want to put yourself at a disadvantage, or just, maybe not a disadvantage, just don't, you'll get all shaken, or you could get really distracted if something unexpected happens.
Exactly. Or you start to have imposter syndrome, where, if you waited to the last minute to pick out what you're going to wear and nothing looks right on you, and you show up in something that you don't feel confident in, when you are in the general room with everybody else that's interviewing and you're looking around and everyone looks professional, it might start to eat away at your confidence.
Keep your door shut when you're interviewing. We love pets at Case Western Reserve School of Medicine, but not unexpected pets during your interview. So keep your door shut, do whatever you can to minimize other distractions.
Yes, exactly. Try to keep everything as controlled as you can. And obviously, should there be an issue with Wi-Fi or internet, they would understand that, versus someone
Absolutely.
coming in, barging in, asking you for something, etc. But just making sure that you have an awareness of your surroundings, and putting yourself in a good space to be able to have a professional conversation with someone, because this is almost like a job interview. It is a professional school, and the expectation is this is the first time they're seeing you off paper and face to face. So you definitely want to come off in your best way possible. So
If
thank
you have
you.
No. I was gonna say, if you have a smartphone, I would also recommend downloading Zoom onto it, or being familiar with how to use that function on your phone. We've interviewed candidates on college campuses where the east part of the campus Wi-Fi went down and they were stressed out and they had no way to get in touch with us because they, were kind of panicky and everything. But it's nice to kind of be able just to pull it up off your phone and, unfortunately have to use your cell signal, but you can kind of keep the wheels on, or the train on the rails, if that does happen for you.
And that said, if something does happen, admissions offices get it. It's technology. We have an emergency number for our candidates to call. If we interviewed somebody during the California fires 2 years ago, the camp fires or whatever, and their Wi-Fi went out and they were being evacuated. I can't believe they didn't reschedule the day, but they were very committed. Clearly, we get it. We'll reschedule you. We'll do whatever, but communication is key. Don't just disappear and hope for the best. Let us know if something happens.
Mhm.
I think the last question I'll ask about any sort of appearance or anything. There's a lot of questions about piercings or unconventional hair color, things like that. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions for that?
I do, because a lot of healthcare environments don't let you do any of those. So think about, maybe you may take it out for your interview, but it's probably going to stay out, because once you hit the wards in the hospitals, you can't really have facial piercings in most hospitals. Some hospitals don't let you have unconventional hair color. So I'm good with piercings. I'm good with different colored hair. I'm good with whatever, but I know that the professional environment does not permit that in general. So we're not just the gatekeepers. We are there to help our students set professional identity as they move forward. So I would recommend that you minimize all of that, because you're not going to probably be able to do that as you move into your clinical settings. Same with tattoos. Steer away from neck tattoos, face tattoos. Up until a few years ago, hospitals wouldn't even let you have visible tattoos. So, you would see sometimes people in our hospital with like an ace wrap on their forearm because they had a tattoo there they weren't allowed to show. Hospitals have backed off a little bit on that, but not all have. So think about, once you get past admissions, the hospitals are going to put a whole new set of rules and regulations on you to be mindful of.
Did you have any comments, Ms. Kimball?
No, as always, I absolutely agree. You have to sometimes play the game at this stage. And I know we talk about being your authentic self, but you also have to remember that some of your interviewers err on the side of more of conservative leanings. So, the face tattoo might cause some concern at the interview stage. So you may have to put, some concealer on it during your interview.
And then to that point as well, again, remember down the road, you are going to be taking care of patients in their most vulnerable forms. And there are patients who have preconceived ideas of what their physicians should look like. Some don't. And by that, I mean piercings, all this kind of thing. So not only you're trying to get to medical school, but you are going to need to do what the medical practice of medicine requires you to do as well.
Perfect. Thank you both. We've had some participants ask about how long they typically have with an interviewer, and will there be multiple? Is it a group? Those type of dynamics?
So for us, like I said, we have the 2 interviews. One, the short file, closed file interview, 20, 25 minutes or so. And then for the open file summary interview, 45, 50 minutes or so.
Yeah, same. We have for our university program, MD program, we have an hour-long interview with a health educational professional or faculty. Then there's a medical student interview for 30 minutes. Our Cleveland Clinic Learner College of Medicine is 2 30-minute faculty interviews, a medical student interview. It's going to vary from school to school. And so that's where doing the homework before you show up is going to be really important. Usually schools will share with you in the interview day materials what you can expect. But in case they don't, look at the MSR. I'll give a shout out to the podcast that my office puts out, All Access Admissions, where different deans of admissions talk about what their interview processes are. Research the website. Be very careful on Reddit and SDN. That's where a lot of trolls go to pull other people down, as we know. So be very careful if you venture into those unknown territories. But as Maria said earlier, this is just like a job interview. And when you go to interview for a job, hopefully you would have researched the company, their mission, what to expect. This is the same way for medical schools as well. So do your homework before you show up. There could be panel interviews, there could be one-on-ones, it could be the multi-mini interview. Sometimes a faculty interviewer may not show up. All of our interviewers are volunteer faculty. If a surgeon gets pulled into a case at the very last minute, you may need to roll with it. So educate yourself on what the day is going to look like and understand that sometimes the day may not even go exactly as was initially advertised.
Yeah, you have to have that flexibility, especially in medicine, because most of the specialties require that as well.
Yeah.
And that under pressure is very, very important. So thank you both.
And one other thing to address,
please.
we're also talking about like the MD interview. If you are a candidate for the MD, PhD, or the MSTP programs, their interview days really do vary. Like at some institutions, one day is like your MD interview day and the other day is like your PhD interview day. At some institutions, it's all just kind of mixed about. Every school handles it a little bit differently. So please do your research on that so it doesn't catch you off guard.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ms. Kimball. We have people asking about if they're asked a question and their response would normally be something that was already on the application, should they reiterate that or should they go with new information?
Yes.
I saw both nodding yes to reiterating and telling more about what's in the application.
Mm-hmm. And they can easily say, I went into a little bit of detail in my application about this, but I also blah, 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 and then add on to it.
And if it's a closed file application, they may ask you a question that you wrote about and they haven't gotten to read the answer. So answer the question that's being asked. Don't try to game it and think about how do they want me to ask it. And if I want more, I'll say, okay, I read about that in your application. Can you tell me more? So remember, not all interviewers will have read the same thing.
And also going back to being flexible, sometimes Dr. Smith was supposed to interview you, but she got called into surgery consult, and now Dr. Jones is interviewing you, and she hasn't had the opportunity to review your file yet.
Again, that flexibility. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that so that, someone interviewing is not caught by surprise and thinks, oh, this is really unprofessional and now it's throwing me off. Be ready for, things to be unpredictable on the other side. And again, just that practicing and being authentic, which I think is one of the most important things that you've shared, really showing who you are as a person and why this matters to you.
The other thing about the interview day structure is that at some schools you come in as, a cohort of like 15 interviewees that day, and you are all lockstep, and you go and do your different breakout rooms for your interview, but then you guys all come back. At some institutions, you're asked to interview on Monday at 2:00, and this other person is reviewing on Thursday at 3:30, and you just click on the link to join a Zoom room, and you're waiting for your interviewer, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And if something goes awry to that level, reach out to the admissions office. One of our current first year medical students was telling me that at her interview, that medical school operated under the model of, she just got like a Zoom link and, hey, you're interviewing at 1:00, click here. And she was like, I was so anxious, and I was just waiting and waiting and waiting. And then I was like, okay, am I in a different time zone? So she said her brain started spiraling, and she said, she was admitted to that school. She goes, but I just felt like it was so disorganized. I didn't want to be a member of that community. So I just tell you that if something goes awry on your interview day at that level, reach out to the admissions office. You are our guest on interview day. We want to make sure you feel comfortable. So feel free, if something happens, to say, hey, can I talk to you about something that happened? My interviewer asked me this question and it felt very uncomfortable. We train our interviewers a lot, but sometimes things happen, and I've heard, of different schools where things have gone wrong, and I just want to make sure that you guys feel empowered to reach out to us if something happens on your interview day.
I totally agree. And we run big processes. I think we interview more than you do, Jen. We interview around 800 people. That's a huge process. So we train everybody. We try to keep it running smoothly, but I want to know, process quality improvement. We want to know if something goes awry for you.
Sorry. I think that's important that you shared that, and I hope everyone really took that to heart, because again, just because you are applying does not mean that you should put up with something that makes you uncomfortable
100%.
or something that is insulting, etc. And no medical school would want to be represented by that one moment. But it gives you awareness, obviously, as to who's interviewing and what's happening. So thank you for sharing your feedback on that. We have a lot of questions about the why medicine question. So the biggest questions are, how do I make this sound authentic and not like everyone else's?
I don't know that it has to be not like everyone else's. There's only so many ways you can tell a story. It's really, have you explored medicine, and are you reflective about what you've done and why this is your path? You don't need to have had any stunning story that happened when you were 5 and it influenced your whole life. And just, have you explored medicine? How do you know it's for you? It's really your answer. And so one of the things that I'm always leery of is when somebody says, how do I stand out? I don't know that you need to worry about standing out if you're just being your authentic self. The reality is, we're all looking for good, solid citizens. Yes, there are many superstars sprinkled in, but you being a good, solid citizen means you're a superstar, because this is a hard game. It's not a game. It's just a hard path to follow. So if you're your authentic self, your story is going to tell itself. It doesn't need to be different or remarkable, or I don't have to write the great American novel about it. Just tell us your story. And if you haven't explored medicine, your story is going to be hard to tell. I always say, as you're going throughout your medical journey and you're exploring as an undergrad, write a journal, write down thoughts, write down reflections, write down things that struck you. Read it again before you're writing your application. Read it again before your interview day. It helps you speak with much more authenticity. So it's not that the story has to be unique, but it's your reflection and what we hear in your voice behind it, and the experiences that you have to help back up what it is you're saying to us.
I couldn't agree more. That is factual information. There's only so many ways you can say you want to be a doctor, but how did the seed get planted, and what did you do to nurture that seed? To say I want to be a doctor because I love Grey's Anatomy. Okay, that's not really a compelling reason. But maybe you were planning on being the only career that's coming to mind right now is a lifeguard, a banker. You wanted to be a banker all your life, right? And you watched Grey's Anatomy with your friends and you found yourself really interested more in the cases. And so then you started volunteering in a hospital, and you started to kind of do like this career shift in your brain. And that's totally fine. We don't expect you, hey, the day I was born in the crib, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. The nurses that took care of me, the doctor, my pediatrician, like at that hospital where I was born, that's what made me want to be a doctor. No, like your journey is different than everybody else's. We just really want to make sure that you've challenged yourself to make sure this is the right career path for you.
Yes, yes, that's fantastic. So important to also highlight the fact that you said, it has to be true to you. Not everybody from the womb and not everybody has the same experience receiving medical care. And then now I want to become a physician or anything but it does have to be something more than I want to be a physician. That's the whole sentence. If that's your whole sentence, there needs to be some reflection. There definitely needs to be more internal work before you move on into this, because it's a significant endeavor, medical school and going forward. So thank you both. Asking someone I know if you have time and they ask you if you have any questions for them, do you feel that it would be, and I'll use the term okay, to ask that person, why are they at that school? Yes, nodding from both, yes. Okay.
Absolutely. I think that if you don't have questions, it's a tremendous missed opportunity. As Ms. Kimball said, you're interviewing us as we are interviewing you. I understand there may be an imbalance of power. It feels that way, but you want to make sure that this is an institution you want to go to as well. So don't ask questions like the humble brag. Sometimes we'll have students ask questions so they can brag about themselves or get there indirectly. Have genuine questions, what you want to know the answers to. And absolutely, you can ask your interviewer, what is it about that institution that they like, what they don't like, what compels them, how they got there. Most people love talking about themselves. So you're probably going to get a good answer if you ask somebody what they like or don't like, or what brought them to that institution.
And also, like for us, you're with, several other students interviewing that day, and there's downtime as we're, waiting for this to happen and moving to the station and whatever. Feel free to talk to your other interviewees.
Mm-hmm.
They're not your competitors. Those are your future colleagues in this career.
Mm-hmm.
So, if like we have a breakout session and we do kind of like a little icebreaker thing. And, if you ask a question from them, just get together and collaborate with your colleagues. Like I said, y'all are in this together. If you've made it to the interview, you've gone through several reviews, and we like what we see here. And as it's been said several times, as you've heard, medicine is a team sport. We want to make sure that you are ready to be a member of a team.
Very important point, being a part of a team. Do you have any tips for reapplicants? What they should share, should not share, etc.?
We like to see reflection. I admire the reapplicant. Applying to medical school is horrible. We try to make it as painless as possible, but it's just not possible. It is very painful. We are aware it's expensive, it's stressful, it's more essays than you can shake a stick at, it's MCATs, it's just awful. So if you are committed enough that you're willing to reapply a second time at our school, we have a lot of admiration for that, but we want to see how you've grown and what's different. Is it a different MCAT? Are you a mature learner? Have you gotten more clinical experience? Don't spend your whole application talking about it, because you've got many other things to mention. There are several schools of thought. I know some pre-med advisors have told me, I tell them not to mention it because maybe no one will notice. We all notice. For me, it's all about the reflection. Are you going to give me a couple sentences about what's different now than what was the prior application? But don't spend a whole time dwelling on it. The acceptance rate to medical school is only around 50%. There's far more qualified applicants. If you don't get in, don't be ashamed. It's not shameful. It just is. If there are parts of your application that you can strengthen, do it. But just be willing to be a little bit reflective about what happened and what you've learned from it. Jen, I don't know if you feel the same way.
Oh yeah. In my former life, I was a pre-health advisor. That's actually
yeah.
how we Dr. Meadows so well.
I remember that life.
Yes, you remember that life very well. It's hard to believe we've known each other for almost 20 years, which is
Yep.
crazy because we're in our late 20s. So
I know the math doesn't work. If math isn't math. Anyway.
math is not mathing. So, so I worked with a lot of students who were reapplicants. And sometimes they immediately rushed into reapplying because they just didn't want to lose any time. And what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So sometimes you have to take a pause, reflect, okay, what happened first go around? Maybe it's something as benign as, hey, the deadline to apply to medical school for these schools was October 31st, and I submitted my AMCAS October 30th. Well, okay, that's an easy fix for next go around, Sometimes it's, I just emotionally wasn't ready. I wrote a very lackluster personal statement. My MCATs weren't there, that kind of thing. So different schools review reapplicants differently, which I know is not the advice you want to hear because you're looking for a constant that all medical schools subscribe to for this. For us, we will see that you reapplied to applied to Vanderbilt previously. If last cycle you didn't apply here, it's not going to get flagged as a reapplicant file, if that makes sense. It's only once if you've applied to Vanderbilt before, that's when we'll see that you applied 2023. And so we don't compare your previous application to this one. We base you on your merits of you as a candidate right now. But since it's on your MCAS application, your interviewer might ask, well, I see that you applied to medical school in 2023. What have you done since your last application cycle? And that's your opportunity to say, hey, listen, I am now working as a scribe at XYZ hospital, and my duties consist of blah, 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 blah. And it's really taught me a lot about so-and-so. And that's fine.
Perfect. We do have some questions about how social media plays into it. Are schools looking at applicants' social media? Do you have any tips or recommendations regarding that?
I would say lock it down. We don't routinely look at social media. Nobody has time, but you never know. Maybe somebody will look you up. Maybe a student will look you up. Keep it clean. Keep it, if you wanted to lock it down, lock it down. I do feel sorry for your generation because you never know what's going to be caught and posted online. Back in the day, nobody knew what we were doing. But you have to be careful. It follows you. Everything you post will follow you. And so I would be very careful. And this is not just to get into medical school. There have been residents and attending physicians who have lost their hospital privileges, who have been removed from their residency because of things they put on social media. So I again want to underscore that we get you into medicine, but a lot of things that we're asking of you are things that we know the practice of medicine will demand of you.
Exactly.
So lock it down, keep it clean, be careful what's posted. Again, you want to be your authentic self, but you are a professional who is going to be held to a standard of behavior that's probably different than your average person on the street. So be careful with your social media. As I said, we don't have time to look at every candidate, but you never know if somebody's going to look.
I barely have time to check my social media. So I'm really not out there looking at every applicant, but also be cognizant of the things that you comment on. So if there's an article on USA Today or something, and there's a comment section and you make a comment and it's beyond the pale, people can do a screenshot. The internet is forever. Same thing for Snapchats. And, so be very careful, lock it down. Great advice.
Our acceptance letter actually says you must maintain the highest levels of personal and professional conduct, including in online materials, because we know how many ships have been sunk for practicing physicians.
That is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing that. That's interesting.
Yes, I have one more question, and then I want to make sure that we give you both time for some parting thoughts for everyone here. This has been fantastic. There's just a lot to talk about in this process. So thank you for being so generous with your advice and so honest about possible pitfalls and red flags. I think everybody definitely learned something today. My final question, are how open should you be? What should be the thing that does not get shared? Is there anything that should not get shared?
I'm often asked about this regarding mental health issues that a candidate might have gone through. Once again, former life, I was pre-med advisor, and I would have students who are applying and they're like, can I talk about, battling clinical depression? Can I talk about being bipolar? Because that really opened my eyes to mental health in medicine, or whatever the case may be. For us, mental health and physical health are one and the same. Health is the operative word there. Just like you wouldn't say, well, I have cancer. Okay, now I want to be a doctor. Like, you would want to tell us like how you are taking care of yourself. Don't just put it out there and not tell us how you are being responsible to you at the end of the day.
And think about why you would be telling us something. What do you hope to accomplish? Are you telling us about a battle with depression because you want us to know that you're resilient and you have more empathy for patients than you ever did before? Are you just telling it to tell it and you don't really have a resolution? You're not sure why you're telling it to us? Think about why you're telling it to us. Remember that a variety of different people are going to be reading your application. If it's not something that you don't want as open access, don't write about it. It's not that we share applications freely, but you have a lot of different eyes on that application. You have application screeners, you have admissions teams, you have admissions committees. You have so many different eyes on your application. So think about why you want to tell us something and what it is you hope that we learn about you from it.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
And also,
Yep.
just one other thing, recognize that sometimes the nerves of the interview day might cause you to become a little bit more emotional. We've had a number of candidates who have started crying during their interview because they're talking about something that they've already written about in their application. It's not like we're just asking them, tell me about a time that your grandmother passed away. Like, I mean, you've written about it, so you were comfortable writing about it. And so when we ask you like follow-up questions, and of course we wouldn't ask you follow-up questions about your grandma dying, but like when we ask you follow-up questions about that situation, sometimes your emotions get the best of you and you start crying. There's nothing wrong with crying, but is that the image that you want to give to the medical school during an interview? So
Really
be
important
about putting stuff in that's still very raw for you.
That's an important thing that you might not know how you react. So you want to make sure that you're as composed as you can be and in control of yourself as you can be. Thank you both. The hour flew by. I do want to make sure you each have a moment for a final takeaway or a hint or words of support to applicants.
I will build on a theme that I think has sort of woven itself throughout our entire conversation, and that's authenticity. We do not want a class full of pre-med bots. We do not want everybody who looks the same, acts the same, talks the same, thinks the same, has the same life experiences. There are so many different areas and practice patterns and niches in medicine that require all sorts of different life experiences, perspectives, and personalities. So be your authentic self within the context of professionalism and understanding what goals you want to have. Again, I always worry when somebody says, how can I stand out? I get you want to stand out because there are so many applications, but instead I think the question is, how can you be authentic? So we do not want a class of pre-med bots. The other thing is, we know it's a tough process. Again, we try to make it as painless as we possibly can. We know it's painful, just medicine's hard too. Medical applications feel really hard, but medicine's hard too. It just is. We are here to tell you that medical students, people get into medical school every single day. Every summer or fall, we matriculate a class full of medical school applicants. They are not magical. They are not mysterious. They put their pants on the same way as you. It's just really a question of being prepared, getting the experiences you need to get, and being authentic and realistic about where it is you're going. So those are, I guess, my words of wisdom and reassurance.
Wonderful. Sorry, Ms.
I
Kimball.
just said it better, but I do want to say I've been the director here for 10 years, and my first application cycle, I remember when we made the admissions decisions, coming home and crying because it broke my heart that we didn't have a med school of 7,000 seats that we could admit everybody who applied. Not everybody gets in the first time they apply, and that is okay. We have a student now who's in residency that applied to us 3 years before he was finally admitted. Your journey is different than everyone else's. Please don't compare yourself to other people. Very easy for me to say that, but we are looking for the best you that you can be.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that information. I want to thank our panelists. We really appreciate you and your institutions, Case Western and Vanderbilt, for allowing us to have you and all your amazing information. I thank everyone who attended and your great questions. Just want to remind you, we have another session in the auditorium about how to tell your story in your application. Tomorrow will be the exhibit hall with the medical schools, and on Friday, a session about how to know if a post-baccalaureate program is right for you. We wish you all the best of luck. I'm sure they look forward to seeing your applications on their screen, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you so, so much.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Good luck.